My daughter-in-law Jessica smiled sweetly as she gestured toward the cold, concrete space where my bed now sat between lawn mowers and storage boxes. What she didn't know was that by tomorrow evening, she'd be desperately calling me, begging, to know why the "for sale, sold" sign had appeared on the front lawn of what she thought was her dream home. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds when someone pushes the wrong 70-year-old woman too far. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 18 months ago when I made what I thought was a generous decision to help my struggling son and his family. A decision that would teach me the hardest lesson of my life about the difference between being kind and being foolish. But to understand how I ended up sleeping in a garage before becoming the most powerful person in my family's life, you need to know who I was before I let my maternal instincts override my business sense. For 42 years, I was Eleanor Whitmore, successful real estate developer and property investor in Charleston, South Carolina. I didn't just sell houses, I built communities. My company, Whitmore Properties, had developed 12 residential neighborhoods, 3 commercial complexes, and a luxury retirement community that became the gold standard for senior living in the Southeast. I started with nothing but a real estate license and a $5,000 loan from my late husband Robert's life insurance policy when he passed away at 38 from a sudden heart attack, leaving me with a 2-year-old son and a mountain of grief. But grief, I learned, could be transformed into determination. My first property was a rundown duplex in North Charleston that nobody else wanted to touch. The previous owner had abandoned it after a fire damaged half the structure, and it had been sitting empty for 3 years. I bought it for $18,000, spent another $15,000 renovating it myself. I learned plumbing, electrical work, and tile installation from YouTube videos and library books, and rented both units for enough to cover my mortgage and put food on the table. That duplex taught me everything I needed to know about real estate. Location matters, but vision matters more. Everyone saw a fire-damaged eyesore. I saw 2 families who needed affordable housing and a property that could generate steady income with the right improvements. By the time Thomas graduated from high school, I owned 17 rental properties across Charleston County. By the time he graduated from college, I had developed my first subdivision, Magnolia Gardens, a 47-home community that sold out before construction was completed. But I didn't stop there. I studied the market, learned about zoning laws, built relationships with city planners and contractors, and slowly expanded from residential rentals to commercial development. When big box stores wanted to build in Charleston, they came to me for land. When the city needed affordable housing solutions, they consulted with me on development strategies. I wasn't just buying and selling properties, I was shaping the growth of Charleston. The Whitmore Commons Shopping Center anchored the revival of West Ashley. The Whitmore Senior Living Community set the standard for luxury retirement housing in the Low Country. The Whitmore Industrial Park brought manufacturing jobs to North Charleston and helped revitalize an economically depressed area. By my 60th birthday, I was regularly featured in Charleston Business Journal as one of the most influential developers in the region. The mayor invited me to serve on the city's Economic Development Advisory Board. The Chamber of Commerce gave me their Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to Charleston's growth and prosperity. I had built something that went far beyond personal wealth. I had created a legacy of community development and responsible growth that would benefit Charleston for generations. But success in business didn't mean I neglected my personal life. After Robert's death, I had focused entirely on building security for Thomas and myself. But as my business grew and stabilized, I began to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I traveled extensively, often combining business trips with personal exploration. I spent a month in Tuscany studying Italian architecture and viticulture, which inspired the design elements I incorporated into Magnolia Gardens. I toured sustainable communities in Denmark and Germany, bringing back ideas that made the Whitmore Senior Living community a model for environmentally conscious development. I collected art from local Charleston artists, supporting the cultural community that made our city unique. My home became a gathering place for charity fundraisers, political discussions, and cultural events. I hosted the annual Charleston Preservation Society Gala for 12 consecutive years, raising over $2 million for historic preservation projects. I was actively involved in Thomas's life throughout his childhood and young adulthood, attending every school play, soccer game, and graduation ceremony. I paid for his education at the College of Charleston, where he studied business administration, and I was proud when he graduated with honors. When he married Jessica 8 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with genuine warmth. I paid for their wedding, a $45,000 affair at the Ocean House on Kiowa Island that Jessica had dreamed of since childhood. When the twins were born, I was in the delivery room, and I've been an active grandmother ever since. I thought I was building something beautiful, a successful business, a strong family, a meaningful legacy. What I didn't realize was that my success would eventually become a source of resentment rather than pride for the people I loved most. Thomas had always been, well, let's call him creatively ambitious. As a child, he was constantly starting projects, building elaborate forts, creating neighborhood newspapers, organizing complicated games that required dozens of participants and complex rules. I admired his creativity and entrepreneurial spirit, even when most of his ventures ended in chaos. In high school, he started a lawn care business that lasted one summer before he decided physical labor wasn't his calling. In college, he launched a campus food delivery service that failed when he realized he'd have to work nights and weekends. After graduation, he tried real estate sales, but he lacked the patience for the long relationship-building process that successful agents require. Each failure was explained by circumstances beyond his control. The lawn care business failed because clients didn't appreciate quality work. The food delivery service failed because college students are unreliable customers. Real estate didn't work because the market was changing too rapidly for traditional sales approaches. I supported him through each venture, both emotionally and financially. I believed that entrepreneurship required experimentation, that failure was part of learning, and that eventually he would find his niche. I also believed that having a safety net would give him the confidence to take risks and innovate. Looking back, I realize I may have created the opposite effect. By cushioning every failure, I may have prevented him from learning the hard lessons that build character and resilience. When Thomas met Jessica, I was hopeful that marriage would provide the stability and motivation he seemed to need. Jessica was smart, organized, and ambitious. She had a marketing degree from USC and had worked for several Charleston companies in increasingly responsible positions. She seemed like the perfect partner to balance Thomas's creativity with practical business sense. Their early years together were promising. Jessica encouraged Thomas to pursue more structured opportunities, and she helped him develop business plans and marketing strategies for his various ventures. When the twins were born, they both embraced parenthood with enthusiasm and dedication. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. Jessica had grown up in a middle-class family in Colombia, but she had always dreamed of a more luxurious lifestyle. Social media became her window into a world of designer clothes, exotic vacations, and perfectly curated homes, and she began to see her current circumstances as temporary stepping stones rather than achievements to be grateful for. She started a family lifestyle blog called Charleston Charm, documenting their daily lives with carefully staged photographs and aspirational content. The blog became her full-time occupation, though it generated very little income. Instead of earning money, It seemed to create an endless appetite for spending on props, outfits, and experiences that would photograph well. Thomas, meanwhile, had discovered cryptocurrency and day trading. He spent hours analyzing market trends and following online gurus who promised quick wealth through smart investments. He convinced himself that traditional business models were obsolete, that the future belonged to people who understood digital currencies and online trading strategies. The combination of Jessica's lifestyle aspirations and Thomas's get-rich-quick schemes created a perfect storm of financial pressure. They needed money to maintain the image Jessica was projecting, and they needed constant new investments to fund Thomas's trading activities. Their requests for help became more frequent and more substantial. A few $100s for a family photo session became a few thousand for a family vacation that would provide content for Jessica's blog. A small loan for Thomas's investment opportunity became a larger loan to cover the losses when the investment failed. I helped because I could afford to, and because I believed I was supporting their efforts to build stability and success. I also helped because despite my business acumen, I had a blind spot when it came to my family. I wanted them to be happy, and I wanted to be generous with the wealth I had worked so hard to accumulate. The crisis that led to their eventual move into my house began with what Thomas called a temporary cash flow issue, but was actually a fundamental mismatch between their income and expenses. Thomas's day trading had resulted in significant losses, money. He had borrowed against their credit cards and home equity line of credit. Jessica's blog required constant investment in new content, clothes, and activities, but generated virtually no revenue. The twins' private school tuition was $24,000 per year. Their club sports fees were another $8,000 annually, and their mortgage and living expenses in a trendy Charleston neighborhood were stretching their budget beyond breaking point. When Thomas came to me in early 2023, explaining that they were facing foreclosure on their townhouse, I was shocked. I had been helping them with smaller amounts regularly, but I hadn't realized the extent of their financial problems. "Mom, I need to ask for something big," Thomas said during one of our Sunday dinners. "We're in real trouble." He explained that they owed $47,000 in credit card debt, were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and had maxed out their home equity line of credit. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings, and they had 30 days to bring their payments current or lose the house. Jessica sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor, we've tried everything. I've been looking for work, but my skills are outdated after being out of the workforce for so long. Thomas has been pursuing several business opportunities, but everything takes time to develop." "We don't want to ask you for money again," Thomas said. "We know how much you've already done for us, but we're desperate. If we lose the house, we don't know where we'll go." The amount they needed, $47,000 plus enough to cover their monthly expenses while they got back on their feet, was substantial even for me. But more concerning than the money was the pattern I was beginning to recognize. This wasn't a temporary crisis. It was the inevitable result of systematic overspending and poor financial decision-making. I agreed to help them avoid foreclosure, but I insisted on conditions. They needed to create a realistic budget, eliminate unnecessary expenses, and develop a concrete plan for increasing their income. Thomas needed to find stable employment instead of chasing investment opportunities, and Jessica needed to either monetize her blog effectively or find traditional employment. They agreed to everything I suggested, expressed profound gratitude for my help, and promised that this would be the last time they needed to ask for financial assistance. Within 6 months, they were back in crisis mode. When Thomas and Jessica approached me about living together, it seemed like a solution that could benefit everyone. They needed stable housing and lower living expenses. I could use help maintaining my large property and would enjoy having family close by. The twins would benefit from living in an excellent school district and having daily access to their grandmother. The conversation about their moving in was carefully orchestrated, though I didn't recognize the manipulation at the time. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation. Thomas said during one of our weekly Sunday dinners at my house. Jessica sat beside him, holding his hand in what I would later recognize as a carefully rehearsed presentation. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? It's about your living situation, Jessica said, her voice full of what seemed like genuine concern. This house is enormous for one person, and frankly, we're worried about you living alone at your age. I felt my spine stiffen slightly. I'm 70, not 90, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my own home. Of course you are, Thomas said quickly. But Mom, think about it practically. You're rattling around in this huge house all by yourself. What if something happens? What if you fall, or have a medical emergency? What if you get lonely? Jessica leaned forward, her expression earnest and caring. Eleanor, we've been talking, and we think it would be wonderful if you came to live with us. We could be a real family unit, helping each other, supporting each other. The suggestion caught me completely off guard. Live with you? In your townhouse? Well, that's the thing, Thomas said, and I caught the first hint of excitement in his voice. Our lease is up next month, and instead of renewing, we were thinking, what if we all live together here, in your house? Jessica jumped in smoothly. It would be perfect, Eleanor. You'd have constant companionship. We'd be here to help with anything you need, and Madison and Mason would get to spend real time with their grandmother. Plus, we could help with the maintenance and upkeep of this big house. They painted a compelling picture. I would have live-in help with household maintenance, daily companionship, and the joy of watching my grandchildren grow up in the same house where I had raised their father. They would have stable housing, excellent schools for the children, and the opportunity to save money while rebuilding their financial situation. What about household expenses? I asked. Utilities, groceries, maintenance. How would we handle all that? We'd contribute what we can, Thomas said. Obviously, we can't match what you're used to spending, but we'd pay for groceries, help with utilities, and I'd take care of yard work and basic maintenance. And I could help with cooking, cleaning, organizing, Jessica added. I love managing households, and it would be wonderful to put those skills to use helping family. The arrangement sounded reasonable and mutually beneficial. What they didn't mention, and what I failed to ask about, were the crucial details about decision-making authority, privacy boundaries, and long-term expectations. When Thomas and Jessica moved into my house in September 2023, it felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in our family's story. The twins were excited about their new rooms, the large yard, and being so close to their grandmother. Thomas seemed motivated to find stable employment now that housing pressure was reduced. Jessica was enthusiastic about contributing to household management and excited about the potential for her blog in such a beautiful setting. The first few months were everything I had hoped for. Madison and Mason adapted quickly to their new school and made friends in the neighborhood. I enjoyed having dinner companions every evening and helping with homework and school projects. Jessica was indeed helpful with household tasks, and Thomas took over yard maintenance and minor repairs. We established routines that seemed to work for everyone. I continued to use my home office for managing my business affairs and property investments. Thomas set up a workspace in the guest house where he could pursue job searching and business development. Jessica used the sunroom for her blog photography and content creation. The twins had plenty of space for homework, play, and entertaining friends. For the first time since Robert's death, my house felt truly alive again. There were children's voices in the hallways, family dinners around the big dining room table, and the constant activity of a busy household. I thought I was witnessing the successful blending of two generations into a harmonious family unit. What I was actually witnessing was the beginning of a systematic takeover that would gradually strip away my authority, privacy, and dignity in my own home. The changes began so gradually that I didn't recognize them as a pattern. Jessica would make small suggestions about household arrangements, moving furniture to improve traffic flow, rearranging kitchen cabinets for better organization, changing dinner routines to accommodate everyone's schedules. Each suggestion made sense individually and was presented as being for my convenience or benefit. Moving the antique secretary desk from the living room to my bedroom would give the children more space to play, while providing me with a more private workspace. Rearranging the kitchen would make cooking more efficient and help Jessica contribute more effectively to meal preparation. I agreed to these changes because they seemed reasonable, and because I wanted to be accommodating to family members who were adjusting to a new living situation. I also agreed because Jessica presented each suggestion as a way to make my life easier, rather than as imposing her preferences on my home. But cumulatively, these small changes began to transform my house from a space that reflected my personality and preferences into a space that accommodated Jessica's vision of family living. The formal dining room, where I had entertained clients and hosted charity events for decades, became the twins' homework and art project space. The living room, with its carefully arranged antique furniture and art collection, became a casual, family room with child-friendly furniture and electronics. My home office was relocated to a smaller room to make space for Thomas's business development activities. More concerning than the physical changes were the subtle shifts in household decision-making. Jessica began making unilateral decisions about grocery shopping, meal planning, and daily schedules, always framing these decisions as helping Eleanor by taking things off her plate. When I expressed interest in hosting my annual charity fundraiser at the house, Jessica gently suggested that it might be too much stress for me and too disruptive for the children's school routine. When I wanted to hire a cleaning service, as I had for years, Jessica insisted that she could handle the cleaning and that paid help would be an unnecessary expense. Each individual decision seemed reasonable, but together they created a pattern where my preferences and routines were gradually being replaced by arrangements that served the family's convenience rather than my comfort. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the evolving living arrangement was the gradual shift in financial expectations. Initially, Thomas and Jessica had promised to contribute to household expenses according to their means. In practice, their contributions became smaller and less regular, while their expectations of my financial support grew larger and more assumption-based. Thomas's job search seemed to consistently yield opportunities that were almost perfect, but required just a bit more time or investment to develop. Jessica's blog required constant investment in new equipment, software, and marketing strategies that would definitely start generating income soon. Meanwhile, household expenses that I had always managed were now being treated as shared family costs that naturally fell to me as the person with the most resources. Private school tuition for the twins became my responsibility because I had so much more space in my budget. Vacations became family experiences that I was expected to fund because I loved spending time with the grandchildren. The twins' extracurricular activities, expensive club sports, music lessons, summer camps, were presented as educational investments that I should want to support as their grandmother. Jessica's wardrobe updates were necessary for her business development activities. Thomas's training courses and certification programs were investments in our family's future financial stability. None of these expenses were explicitly demanded, but they were presented in ways that made refusal seem selfish or short-sighted. I was made to feel that questioning these costs meant I didn't care about my grandchildren's opportunities or my son's career development. By the end of their first year living with me, I was covering virtually all household expenses plus funding, lifestyle and activity costs that exceeded what I had spent when living alone by more than $60,000 annually. The most insidious change was the gradual erosion of my authority in my own home. Decisions that had always been mine to make, what to have for dinner, what temperature to keep the house, what television shows to watch in the living room, became group decisions where I was outvoted by the family of 4. When I wanted to host book club meetings, Jessica suggested that having outsiders in the house regularly made the children uncomfortable. When I wanted to redecorate the guest bathroom, Thomas pointed out that any improvements would benefit the whole family and should reflect everyone's preferences. My daily routines, morning coffee on the garden terrace, evening reading in the living room, weekend visits from friends, were gradually modified to accommodate family schedules and activities. I found myself asking permission to use rooms in my own house or apologizing for disrupting family activities with my personal plans. The shift was so gradual and was always presented in terms of family harmony and consideration for others. I was made to feel that insisting on my preferences was selfish, that truly caring about family meant being flexible and accommodating. But flexibility only went in one direction. My routines could be changed to accommodate family needs, but family activities were rarely modified to accommodate my preferences or comfort. The moment that began my awakening to the reality of my situation came during a conversation with my longtime friend and neighbor, Patricia Hensley. Patricia and I had been friends for 25 years, and she had watched the changes in my household with growing concern. "Eleanor, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer," Patricia said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with how your life has changed since Thomas and Jessica moved in? Do you feel like yourself in your own home?" I started to give an automatic positive response, but Patricia held up her hand. "Before you answer, let me tell you what I've observed. You used to host beautiful dinner parties and charity events. You used to travel whenever you wanted. You used to make decisions about your home and your life without consulting anyone. You used to have your own routines and your own space." She paused, watching my expression carefully. "Now you ask my permission to meet for coffee because you're not sure if it conflicts with family plans. You haven't hosted an event in your own home in over a year. You've stopped talking about your business because family finances are complicated now. You seem like a guest in your own house." Her words hit me like a physical blow because they were undeniably true. I had been so focused on being a good grandmother and a supportive mother that I had gradually surrendered my own identity and authority. "Patricia, they needed help, and I wanted to be there for them." "Of course you did. But Eleanor, there's a difference between helping family and disappearing into family. You've built an incredible life and career. You've earned the right to live however makes you happy. Don't let anyone, even people you love, convince you that your preferences don't matter anymore." That conversation planted a seed of awareness that would grow into full recognition of how completely my life had been transformed, and not necessarily for the better. As 2024 progressed and we approached the 18-month mark of our living arrangement, I began to notice more troubling patterns. Thomas had given up actively looking for traditional employment, convinced that his various online ventures would eventually provide the breakthrough he needed. Jessica had stopped even pretending that her blog was a business and instead treated it as a full-time hobby funded by my resources. The twins, now 14, had grown accustomed to a lifestyle that their parents couldn't actually afford, but that I was expected to maintain. Private school, expensive sports, designer clothes, the latest electronics, all funded by Grandma Eleanor, as if it were natural and expected rather than generous. Most concerning of all was the way Thomas and Jessica had begun to speak about my house as if it were their family home rather than my personal property. They made plans for renovations, discussed changes they wanted to make, and referred to our house when talking to friends and neighbors. During a particularly eye-opening conversation, I overheard Jessica on the phone with her sister saying, "We're so lucky that Eleanor is letting us fix up the house. Thomas has so many ideas for improvements, and she's been really generous about funding the updates we need." The updates we needed in our house. Funded by my generosity. That's when I realized that somewhere along the way I had stopped being the homeowner who was generously sharing her space and had become the elderly relative who was lucky to be allowed to live in what had become their family home. The stage was set for the events that would unfold over the next few months, events that would test exactly how far my family was willing to push their advantage, and how much of my dignity they thought I was willing to sacrifice for the sake of family harmony. What they didn't know was that the 70-year-old woman they saw as a convenient source of housing and funding was still the same person who had built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire through careful planning, strategic thinking, and an absolute refusal to let anyone take advantage of her generosity. They were about to get a very expensive education in the difference between kindness and weakness. But first, they would push me just a little bit further than I was willing to go. The second year of our living arrangement brought changes that I initially interpreted as natural family evolution, but which I now recognize as the systematic establishment of a new hierarchy in my own home, one where I was no longer at the top. Thomas had completely abandoned any pretense of job searching by the spring of 2024. Instead, he had embraced what he called entrepreneurial flexibility, which seemed to involve spending most of his day in the converted guest house, monitoring cryptocurrency markets, participating in online trading forums, and developing elaborate business plans for ventures that required substantial upfront investment but promised revolutionary returns. His latest obsession was something called social commerce integration, essentially a plan to create an app that would allow social media influencers to sell products directly through their content. He had spreadsheets showing projected revenues in the millions, partnership agreements with influencers who had never actually agreed to work with him, and a timeline that always seemed to be just 6 months away from launch. "Mom, this is the future of retail," he would explain during our increasingly one-sided dinner conversations. "Jessica's blog is going to be the perfect testing ground for the platform. Once we prove the concept with her audience, we'll be able to scale to thousands of influencers across multiple social media platforms." The fact that Jessica's blog had fewer than 200 regular followers and generated approximately $50 per month in affiliate revenue seemed irrelevant to his projections. When I gently pointed out the gap between his ambitious plans and current reality, he would explain that I didn't understand the digital marketplace and that traditional business metrics don't apply to disruptive technologies. Jessica, meanwhile, had fully embraced her role as a lifestyle content creator, which apparently required constant investment in new equipment, clothing, and experiences that could be photographed and shared with her small but highly engaged audience. Her daily routine had evolved into what she called content development, planning photo shoots around the house and grounds, shopping for props and outfits, and spending hours editing photos and writing captions that presented our family. Life as an aspirational lifestyle that others should envy and emulate. "Eleanor, you have to understand that this isn't just a hobby," she would explain when I questioned the necessity of another $300 photography backdrop or $500 ring light setup. "This is brand building. Every successful influencer started with a small audience and built their following through consistent, high-quality content. We're investing in our future." The "we" in that sentence was telling. Somehow, my financial support of her equipment purchases had become an investment in our future success, even though I had never agreed to become a business partner in her social media ventures. Perhaps the most concerning change was in Madison and Mason, who had transformed from grateful grandchildren into entitled teenagers who seemed to view me as a convenient source of funding rather than a family member deserving respect. Madison, now 14, had developed expensive tastes that she justified as necessary for maintaining her social position at Charleston Preparatory Academy. Her wardrobe required constant updating with designer brands that her classmates wore. Her extracurricular activities, competitive dance, private voice lessons, advanced art classes, all came with substantial fees that were presented to me as educational investments. "Grandma Eleanor, everyone at school has the new iPhone," she would announce, not as a request, but as a statement of fact that implied I should immediately address this social disadvantage. When I suggested she could earn money for the phone, through chores or a part-time job, she looked genuinely confused. But Grandma, I don't have time for a job. I have dance practice every day after school, voice lessons on Wednesdays, art class on Saturdays, and I need time for homework and social activities. Mom says my job is to focus on my education and personal development. Mason had developed an equally expensive hobby in competitive gaming and technology. His room was filled with elaborate computer setups, gaming chairs, and equipment that he claimed was necessary for his content creation career and esports development. At 14, he was already talking about becoming a professional gamer or technology influencer, careers that apparently required thousands of dollars in equipment but no actual work experience or education. Grandma, you don't understand the gaming industry, he would explain with the confident dismissiveness that teenagers reserve for adults they consider hopelessly out of touch. This isn't just playing games. This is skill development, brand building, and network creation. Some professional gamers make millions of dollars per year. When I pointed out that very few people actually achieve that level of success and suggested he might want to develop backup plans, he would roll his eyes and appeal to his parents, who invariably supported his passion pursuits, and suggested I was being negative about his dreams. Both children had internalized their parents' attitude that my financial support was a natural resource rather than a generous gift. They made requests, or rather announcements of need, without any sense that they were asking for significant favors. They had never been taught to show gratitude for the private school education, expensive activities, designer clothes, and latest technology that I provided. More troubling, they had begun to treat me with the casual disrespect that teenagers often show toward family members they consider powerless. They would interrupt my conversations, ignore my requests, and dismiss my opinions about everything from household rules to current events. When I tried to discuss this with Thomas and Jessica, they assured me that this was normal teenage behavior, and that I shouldn't take it personally. They suggested that being too strict with the children would damage my relationship with them, and that the best approach was to be understanding and supportive of their developmental needs. The message was clear. Any attempt to set boundaries or demand respect would be seen as inappropriate interference in their parenting decisions. One of the most galling aspects of our evolving living situation was watching Jessica document our family life for her blog and social media accounts in ways that completely misrepresented the reality of our relationships and arrangements. Her Charleston Charm blog presented a curated version of our life that bore little resemblance to the actual dynamics in our household. Photos of family dinners that I had prepared and paid for were captioned as examples of multi-generational family cooperation and Jessica's entertaining style. Pictures of the twins in their expensive clothes and equipment were tagged as examples of mindful parenting and supporting children's authentic interests. My beautiful home and gardens became the backdrop for content that portrayed Jessica as a successful lifestyle influencer living in her family's historic Charleston estate. The antique furniture, art collection, and landscaping that I had spent decades assembling were presented as elements of Jessica's refined aesthetic and the Whitmore family's sophisticated lifestyle. Most infuriatingly, Jessica had begun incorporating me into her content as a prop rather than a person. Photos of me cooking dinner were captioned as learning traditional Southern recipes from Thomas's family. Pictures of me helping with homework were presented as examples of the benefits of multi-generational living. My garden tours were filmed as Jessica explores the family estate. I was being used to add authenticity and gravitas to content that was essentially promoting Jessica's personal brand, but I was never credited as a contributor or partner. Instead, I was presented as a supporting character in her family's lifestyle story. The most frustrating part was that this content was being created in my home, using my resources and featuring my life, but I had no control over how I was portrayed, or what aspects of our family life were shared with strangers on the internet. When I expressed concerns about privacy and asked to review content before it was posted, Jessica explained that spontaneous, authentic content was more engaging than staged posts, and that asking for approval would compromise the natural family dynamics that made her blog appealing. Essentially, I was told that my comfort and privacy were less important than the marketability of her content. As Thomas and Jessica became more comfortable with their living arrangement, their financial expectations and demands escalated dramatically. What had begun as occasional requests for help had evolved into an assumption that I would fund their entire lifestyle without question or complaint. The monthly contributions to household expenses that they had promised never materialized in any meaningful way. Thomas would occasionally buy groceries or pay a utility bill, then reference these small payments for months as evidence of his financial contribution to our household.